Hey y'all, it's your girl Aaron. I'm trying to record in a new location today, but I wanted to talk about the politics in the USA again, and I wanted to do a video talking about how the Green Party could win the election. So I've done how Trump can win and how Biden can win, but today I wanted to do how the Green Party can win. And hearing that, a lot of people might immediately think, it's impossible, it can't happen, you're gonna feed us a bunch of bullshit, etc., etc. And, whether it can happen or not, well, it is an undetermined thing, and in the current trajectory of things, it isn't going to happen. And I'm not trying to say that, all it takes is for progressives to just vote green and you'll have enough to win an election or anything like that. Rather, I wanted to talk about, in general, what would it take for it to happen? And I think to actually understand how it might be possible takes a understanding of how we actually, how our society works in general. So we live in an authoritarian society. Capitalism is authoritarian. It specifically gives people who have capital authority over people who don't, either directly or indirectly via just having resources and a bigger capacity to exert their will. But, oftentimes, even directly via things like employment or that kind of thing. So we live in a society where people who have a lot of money or have a lot of social capital, all kinds of capital really, um, they are the ones who get to decide what happens. So when it comes to election, you basically the people are not really making up their own minds. They're just doing what their authority figures tell them to. And for the most part, people's authority figures are telling them to either vote for Republicans or vote for Democrats. There's no critical thinking. There's no culture of critical thinking. There's no culture of deciding things for yourself. You only have a culture of praising and copying and adopting ideas of popular people. If you do actually manage to start thinking for yourself and coming up with your own ideas and stuff, well, that's great, but you are then radical because you've now broken away from that authority structure of that pyramid of thinking. You could think of it, but until then, until you actually become radicalized, all you're able to do, not because you physically limited from it, but ideologically, the loyalty to the system uh, leads to loyalty to those at the top of the system making decisions for you. And you may not even realize it's happening. Now, one example of how the Green Party could win would be if people at the top of the pyramid decided that that's what they wanted to happen. So, for example, if you looked at the people who have a lot of social capital, and that can be politicians, it could be people like AOC or Bernie Sanders, it could be celebrities that, a lot of people take seriously when they talk and stuff. It could be the people on the news networks, or it could be your, your pet political pundits. Whether that's someone like TYT, Secular Talk, or Rising, or whatever, even like the CNNs and the MSNBCs and whatever, wherever you're getting your news from and stuff. In all these cases, those are people that are being seen as authority figures, and basically, when it comes to the large scale, individual people might be an exception, but the pattern that comes across through the whole is conformity to ideas that they have, and to not stray outside of those. When one of those sort of thought leaders or authority figures or people with a lot of social capital or celebrities or whatever you want to call them breaks away from the sort of normal, what's considered normal, when they break away from the hegemony, when they go against the accepted norms of thought, they start to get vilified and marginalized. So we can look at somebody like Jimmy Dore. Jimmy Dore used to be on TYT and used to be, able to get interviews with pretty much any politician he wanted to. And when he started to realize that, basically when he started to think for himself, when he started to begin the process of being radicalized, he started to tell people that, we need to get rid of the two-party system. We need to start getting behind a third party, that, the Democrats and the Republicans are the same, etc. Then he got marginalized for it. He got, sort of removed from their circle. Those people wouldn't want to have him on their show anymore because he'd start to say things that go against the accepted thinking, the accepted norms. So that's basically how that hegemony of thought is maintained, is that anytime someone who does have any social capital goes against it, everyone else who has social capital, etc., starts to treat them as the enemy. So what it would take would be people who do have that social capital and even physical capital, which generates social capital itself, if they began to actually start to think critically, or actually start to think outside the framing that's been presented to everybody, this idea that there's two choices, that you need to vote for the lesser evil, but then when they say that, they're implying that the Democrats are the lesser evil, which doesn't really make sense, because the Democrats and the Republicans work together as a team, as one entity with two sides. They are like the yin and the yang, where they fit together, contain each other, and maintain each other and support each other, and they can't really live without each other. So they actually don't constituent two evils, they constituent one evil with two aesthetics. And so the lesser of two evils is actually the Green Party, because they are still evil in a sense that they are still promoting capitalism, they're still promoting the state, they're still promoting ideas that are still going to cause harm, suffering, etc. They're not out there saying, let's build mutual aid networks, let's get rid of money, let's get rid of hierarchy. If they were doing that, then I wouldn't call them evil, but they are evil, just a lot less evil than, the counterparts. But so the lesser of two evils is actually the Green Party. But the framing that's being presented to people is that the lesser of two evils is the Democratic Party. And so if people started to go against that, and they started to say, no, actually, I'm going to go for the Green Party, and I actually want them to win. Not just, it's a protest vote, or, people, you shouldn't be saying that your vote's a protest vote to begin with, because you shouldn't be making protest votes. You should be voting strategically, not out of protest. So, for example, if you vote for the Green Party, you can do things like signal to other progressives that they're not alone, that there's other people out there who also want progressive policies. It's not protesting, it is, signaling. It is getting a message out. It is making your voice heard. So it's not that it isn't a protest. I mean, there's nothing wrong with protesting, but calling it a protest is minimizing it and reducing it to only a little bit of what it actually is, which is a far bigger strategy. It is working towards a future where they can win. But if people didn't just frame it that way anyway, they didn't say, I'm voting for the Green Party because I'm, I can't bring blah, 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 blah. No, I'm voting for the Green Party because I want them to win. If that's the attitude people at the top of the social hierarchy begin to say, then that can actually turn the tides in popular opinion. It's not going to happen without them. we live in an authoritarian society, and that includes people containing themselves to only opinions that they think will be socially acceptable. And the people who determine what is socially acceptable are those at the top of the social hierarchy: celebrities, rich people, politicians, etc. So let's say AOC, Bernie, the Squad, let's say all the activist celebrities, people like Mark Ruffalo, basically, if they all said, that's it, like we all going all in on the Green Party, not just as a protest, not just to send a message, but to actually try and get them the victory. That would start to begin to allow people to adopt that themselves personally, because they would have been given permission by the authority structure. So then, if that begins to happen, and more of them begin to join in, you actually will begin to see popular opinion shift. So basically, that, in a nutshell, that would be how the Green Party could win, is if the people at the top of the social hierarchy actually chose to try and make them win and fought for it. And if, they every time is like, people like watching their favorite celebrity, right? So if all of these celebrities reached out to all these news organizations, everything, everywhere that there's a platform, they went to them and said, like, hey, have me on your platform, I want to talk about the election, whatever. And then instead of saying, like, vote for the Democrats, they went and say, like, we got to vote Green, like, the Democrats are done. We need to actually try and get the Green Party to victory. We actually cannot wait any longer. We need the Green New Deal, Medicare for all. We cannot wait any longer. We cannot wait 4 years. We cannot wait until we've moved Biden left, as some people are imagining is possible, which is absolutely horrendously bad in terms of actually logic and thinking of, he's out there telling people he's not going to do it, but you somehow think he will. So they go onto all of these platforms and they start saying all of that kind of thing. Their fans are more likely to now consider their opinions and see if they agree with it. Now, a lot of people might actually agree in principle, but be too afraid to take the position. And so once their favorite celebrity or whatever takes the position, they will now start to vocalize it and advocate it for it themselves. And so now the discourse will start to shift. Anytime someone is voting for a Democrat, even if it's a celebrity or whatever, still voting for the Democrats, the people on those platforms will be, what do you think of, this person at the top of the hierarchy, rich person, famous person, whatever, politician? They're saying that we need to vote for the Green Party. What do you think about that? And that begins to put pressure on them to justify their positions. And if you look at it, it isn't actually justifiable, because there isn't actually any reason to vote for the Democrats. Not when you have a physical, practical, material possibility. People can actually go, there's enough people and enough ballot access for people to actually vote for the Green Party. They could win by 60, they could get 60, 70% in the election. It's completely possible. And you might think, no, it's not possible. People will never do, and that's what I'm trying to communicate, is that people will do it, but only once the authority structure enables them to. Only once those at the top tell them it's okay to do so. And until that happens, sure, they won't. But what I'm saying is, if the people at the top started to change their minds, that would start the ball rolling, and it could snowball into a full-on movement. How quickly does it take a meme to propagate? You could feel like, you go off the internet for a couple days and you come back and there's like a whole new set of memes that you've never been part of the forming of, and you have to go back and see, oh, why are people using this new word? Why are people using this image? Why are people talking about this topic that they weren't talking about before? And find out, oh, okay, this thing went viral, or this thing that's is really funny happened or whatever. Um, and it can propagate quickly. It just literally takes a couple days. So if you are out there saying that the Democratic Party is the best option because the Green Party can't win, you are doing two things. One, you're claiming to predict the future because you're saying that it's an already fixed point, that the future is not changeable, that you've already seen the future and seen that this change of attitude didn't happen. And two, you're reinforcing it not happening. You are advocating for people to not make that shift in consciousness. You're being an agent of, an ambassador of, an activist for that change not happening. Because the reality is that it isn't set in stone. The reality is that 3 days before the election, suddenly something might happen, some viral, take might come across, and you might see celebrity after celebrity starting to ditch. Let's say like Biden literally says the quiet part out loud, says something like, "Oh no, I'm the one who told Obama we should start deporting people. I'm the one who said we should do forced hysterectomies. I'm the one who drew up plans for cages." Like, it's possible that he did, he loves nothing more than locking people who aren't white in prison and making them suffer. So it's possible that he was the architect of all that. And let's say 3 days before the election, he says the quiet part out loud, mentions that, and celebrities, thought leaders, pundits, news anchors, politicians, rich people were so disgusted and appalled with it that they actually said, "You know what? I can't. I'm done. Let's like everybody. Let's try and get the Green Party to it. Come on, everybody. Let's do it." And in a matter of days, it could happen, and they could win. And so, by saying it's not possible, you're claiming that that kind of thing won't happen, and that is revealing that you have a loyalty to it not happening. Because until that time, you should be saying it's possible because you should know that it is. Sure, it does mean that you need the people at the top of the hierarchy to adopt this sort of more radical position, but that's happened before in other places in the world. People have had popular movements for change. They have done things like protest, strike, occupy, and get elections, redone. Like, you could literally have a general strike and protest and get the Republican and the Democratic Party declared invalid, disbanded, and plan an election, have an interim government that is led by actual people, not by politicians, until another election happens, and then you could have a whole new set of parties without even having like, this is completely possible. It's happened so many times across the world, but people at the top don't want it to happen, and so people at the bottom don't think it's possible. And it takes you actually realizing, understanding, and explaining to people that it is possible before the people at the top will ever feel like there's any reason for them to adopt that. Like, why would they risk their careers taking a risky position that they know people are going to reject them for? That's ultimately why they aren't doing it. They aren't getting behind the Green Party because they're worried that if they did, people would blame them for the Republicans winning again. And, it's fear-based decision making, and it's self-preservation for them. It isn't, so if for some reason, maybe the like some huge weed farms burn, and suddenly people start thinking creatively and start thinking like let's say there's the Grammys, and someone floods the aircon system with salvia or something, and everyone trips, and come out of it thinking like, why the hell were we on that page? We could just choose a different future. I'm not saying it's going to happen or that that's how, a realistic situation, but my point is that, they're not going to risk their careers because people are going to blame them. And so it's sort of self-reinforcing. The people at the bottom, adopt the framing, and the people at the top can't move because if they try to move outside of the framing, then the people at the bottom will go ahead with the rest of the people at the top in vilifying them. But that doesn't mean that it can't happen. It can. It's happened in other places. And so, in my opinion, that is actually going to be the most effective thing to do. I don't think people realize this, but like, let's say the Green Party gets 20% of the votes, but the Republicans win. That 20% does represent political power. Yes, electoral college, blah, blah, blah. But it signals that there are 20% of voters who think that way, and that's not something that can just be discounted, because it means that, you have the potential, because it only takes something like 3% of a population to revolt to get a radical shift in structure. So if 20% of people are voting for a Green Party, you only need what, like 20% of them to be willing to revolt to actually have a revolution become possible. So that does actually limit Trump's power. It does mean that he can't get away with doing all the nonsense he's doing, because every time he does, there will be so many more progressive politicians who can, have this popular support, which adds weight to their voice, and they can go and they can challenge it and bring attention to it. And instead of being like the Democrats, tearing up speeches, clapping, kneeling in appropriated culture clothing, and doing whatever they can, wearing fancy shoes, whatever they can to look like they are opposed to the Republicans, while actually doing everything they can. Now you'll have people who are actually opposed to them and are going to talk the truth, are going to say to the American people, like, what's really going on. And that is going to be limiting, and it's actually going to limit Trump's power more than the Democrats even want to or could, because they already have their established opposition to progressivism. So even if Trump wins, if the Green Party gets enough votes, that still limits his power. And the thing is, at this rate, Trump is going to win anyway, because the Democrats aren't offering anyone anything. The biggest voting bloc are non-voters, and Trump is more likely to pull people from a non-voter to vote for him than the Democrats are to pull a non-voter to vote for them. And so there's this huge untapped resource of voters that only Trump is actually willing to try and access. And so the Democrats are probably going to lose anyway. But the problem is, when you go hard for the Democrats, when you try to say that that is the only route, you suppress the Green Party movement, you suppress the Third Party movement, you suppress real progressives so much that they actually don't end up having that voice, and they can't actually end up being that limiting factor. And that means that the Democrats become the only ones who can, and then they just won't. So, voting for the Green Party, voting Third Party, even if Trump wins, it's still going to be better than if the Democrats lose. And so, it's still going to be better. And to be honest, the Democrats winning, but the Green Party getting no votes, is probably going to be worse than the Republicans winning, but the Green Party getting a lot of votes. Because they are still going to be a limiting factor if they get a lot of votes. They are still going to have the social capital that comes from a big voter turnout for them. They're still going to be able to get onto platforms with that and point out Trump's rubbish and do the things that we wish the Democrats would do. And that's all possible, even if they get something like only 20% of the vote. It will still be a large enough amount that it will probably be better with the Republicans in power and them with 20% than with the Democrats in power and them with like 5%. So basically, yeah, there's no reason to still be on the Democrat train, other than the fact that the people at the top of the social hierarchy are still on that train and you are following them, that they are the ones deciding for you and thinking for you. And they also are the ones with the most interest in the status quo remaining the way it is, because that's what brought them to the top of that hierarchy. And so the progressive change of actually, things like addressing income inequality, universal health care, and things that save the environment, they're less likely to actually want to do it, because the environment getting screwed over, people not having health care, and there being lots of inequalities was a successful model for them. But it is still possible for them to change their mind. It's still possible for them to grow a backbone. It's still possible for them to decide to become fighters for justice, fighters for progressive policies, to get behind the Green Party and to start getting momentum forward. And are you trying to tell me that if, the majority of the celebrities got on board with the Green Party, they would still lose? I don't think so. I think people will, just as much as they are following the authority and the thoughts of those at the top now, it's going to be just the same then. If the majority of the celebrities got behind the Green Party, the majority of the people would too. We live in an authoritarian society. That's the way things happen, unfortunately. But yeah, so I think at this point, if you consider yourself a radical and you agree with what I've said, basically, you should not tolerate voting for Democrats. You should not claim that it's the lesser of two evil. You should understand that the Democrats and the Republicans are the same evil, and that the Green Party is the lesser of two evil, and that the Green Party is actually your harm reduction vote. They're the ones that are actually going to be able to fight against, whether it's Trump or Biden, whoever wins. But even if it's Trump, they're going to be more effective as losers with a decent support than the Democrats would be, with a lot of support or even winning. So how does the Green Party win? Well, unfortunately, requires people at the top of the social hierarchy to get on board with it. But we've seen celebrities change their tune because of popular pressure before, and that means it's still possible now. If everybody starts, demanding them to do this, then a lot of them will. And once some of them do, more will. And it can snowball and build, and you can actually have a Green Party when you can have Medicare for All and the Green New Deal next year. And all it takes is to actually fight for progressive change and to put pressure on those at the top of the hierarchy, because you understand that that's the society we live in. And we don't have time to get everyone to start thinking critically, but we do have time to put pressure on those at the top to change their minds, which will give the liberty to those at the bottom to also change their minds, seen as there is a hegemony of thoughts, etc. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. So if you disagree with me, feel free to comment on that, but I think this is quite a compelling argument, and I'm going to be trying to put pressure on people to vote Green, because until 2 or 3 days before the election, they still actually have a chance at winning the election. And I am preparing myself for the tragedy of that not happening, but I'm not going to act like it's impossible until it actually is. And memes do take 2 or 3 days to propagate, so I'll accept that it's impossible 2 or 3 days before the election. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. See you all around. Bye.